Here's what makes feminism so insidious. The women who have the most power in this country are not everyday women like you and I who are living quiet and hopefully happy lives. They're a very left-leaning, disgruntled bunch who reside first and foremost in our universities. That's where the propaganda really begins. But also in the White House, in the news media, and in the most impressionable space of all, Hollywood. These women, along with their weak-minded male colleagues, routinely and incessantly sell the idea that men are toxic and that women are victims of a society that is set up to make them fail. How can women ever be content in an environment that insists they're victims? How's that possible? And how can men and women find their way to each other under such destructive cultural conditioning? Just the other day, Netflix CEO Ted Sarandos said about his profession, quote, "Storytelling has real impact in the real world." You think? That impact can be hugely positive, and it can be quite negative. And indeed, the messaging that comes out of Hollywood is almost all negative when it comes to the relationship between women and men. Very little, if any, pop culture has narratives about love that are uplifting, empowering, or just plain real. And what we see and hear around us is hugely impactful on our thoughts and decision-making. Most people need to be confirmed by the society in which they live. So if the constant drumbeat to which we're exposed is that men, especially fathers, are clueless at best and dangerous at worst, what do you think that's going to do to women's perception of men? And what do you think we're going to get from men in return? We're going to get exactly what we are getting. To begin, a widening education gap across the US. The number of men currently enrolled at 2- and 4-year colleges has fallen behind women at record levels. And this imbalance has massive implications for society. Not because there's anything wrong with not having a college degree. In fact, the state of universities today is such that I personally believe they're going to fall apart eventually, but that's a different conversation. But because women are predisposed to marry men of equal or higher status. Let me say that again. Women are predisposed to marry men of equal or higher status. Women aren't doing anything wrong in wanting that. It is literally how they're wired. And for good reason, which I'll come back to in a moment. What this means is that if women continue to outpace men on college campuses so dramatically, as they currently are, the number of equally college-educated men will be so small that women won't be able to find the kind of man they want to start a family with when they do later on become hell-bent on doing so, which almost all women do. And indeed we just learned that that's exactly what's happening, as college-educated women are now choosing to have babies outside of marriage. This is new for this demographic. And while there may be more than one reason for it, at the end of the day, it comes down to women having been encouraged to map out a life that leaves no space for marriage and motherhood. Today, women focus exclusively on education and career and believe they have all the time in the world to get married and start a family. But their bodies have a different plan. Just as women begin to hit their peak at work, their biological clock is winding down. It is at this point that women become laser-focused on having a baby. Only their choices for a husband have dramatically dwindled. This same outcome would be true in any era, but it's especially true in an era in which there are far fewer marriageable men. The pool has shrunk, in part because many women are lacking purpose and a plan for their lives. They just aren't motivated. And guess what doesn't motivate a man to action? Telling him he's superfluous, that he doesn't matter. Letting him know that women rule the world now, and that he'll have to get in line with her requirements if he wants a seat at the table. It isn't until or unless a woman has a son that she is able to see all of this for what it is. America is clueless about the value of men and what they offer women, children, and society. We scoff at the fact that fatherhood is indispensable for the health and well-being of children. We reject that men's needs and desires and behaviors are any different, or should be any different, from women's. We insist that it doesn't matter if a woman out-earns her man, which not only strips men of their primary identity, but doesn't sit well with women either. In 2007, see, I knew I'd mess that up.
I like your different altitude bulbs.
Oh my God. Okay, is that right? In 2017, Pew Research published a finding that was headlined, "Americans see men as the financial providers, even as women's contributions grow." 71% of all Americans, men and women, said that a man's earnings are, quote unquote, very important for him to be a good husband. A mere 25% said the same about women. And that is where the rubber meets the road, right there. Because that isn't economics. That's male and female nature. And it isn't going away. And it isn't going away for one simple reason. Because women have babies and men do not. And this has dramatic implications. Not the least of which is that women become vulnerable at this stage of life and in fact do need a man on whom they can depend. Because if a woman marries a man who's not motivated to achieve or to build something on behalf of his family, the biological imperative of mom and baby cannot be met. When this happens, mothers and babies want to be together but can't be. And this phenomenon is wreaking havoc on women who are thrust back into the workforce long before they're ready to be there. And that's when their lives become unmanageable. That's when the real problems begin. This phenomenon is not due to outdated government policies regarding paid leave and childcare, as you will hear ad nauseum in the media. And even if it were, those things are a temporary fix at best. They don't solve the underlying problem. The real problem is that modern women have been encouraged to build lives that do not work in the long term, and that, quite frankly, don't even match what most of them want. Being career-focused feels innocuous when a woman is in her 20s. But most women still want to get married and have a family someday. And when they do, their priorities will change dramatically. And if they have not planned well for this season of life, they will find themselves stuck. Had they been encouraged to reverse their priorities from the get-go, to put marriage and family at the center and tailor all other life decisions academically, professionally, and even financially around that instead, their lives would be functioning more smoothly. We're running around in this country acting as though men and women must live identical lives in order to be deemed equally valuable. It doesn't need to be this way. There's a completely different and much more powerful way to approach the relationship between women and men. To build a relationship that lasts, men and women must take into account their respective biological proclivities. This is true both in dating and in marriage, but it is in marriage where a couple becomes interdependent, which means they depend on each other. It's a team effort that's designed to be complementary, not a competition. And unfortunately, that's exactly what it has become, thanks to America's obsession with so-called gender equality, which seeks to strip men and women from their innate differences and make them interchangeable. That's key. That word is key. Not just the same, although it means basically the same thing, but interchangeable. That doesn't matter whether it's a man or woman doing something or that there are no differences between them. But in order to subscribe to this radical worldview, one would have to believe that the work involved in raising helpless newborns to become physically and mentally healthy adults is somehow less valuable than work that produces a paycheck.